President, I rise today in strong opposition to the nomination of Russell Vogt to be the head of the Office of Management and Budget. His leadership will only continue the disruption that is hurting Georgians in every corner of my state, even as I speak. Over the past 2.5 weeks, my state has been plagued by chaos, by confusion that has harmed Georgia families and Georgia workers and organizations serving their communities. We are witnessing right now a careless and heartless assault on federal investments and a freeze of government funding that has already been appropriated by Congress to help Georgia seniors, veterans, students, and so many more. Let's be clear, these are funds that have already been appropriated. We've already gone through the legislative process. And somehow the president has created this new process in which he says, I don't care what Congress has done. I don't care what laws have been passed. It has to come back by me through the OMB manager. This cannot stand. And I'm afraid that these undemocratic antics will only continue if the Senate confirms Russell Vogt to be head of the Office of Management and Budget. Vogt is one of the architects of Project 2025, which initially President Trump ran away from. You know a politician's program is really bad when he won't even admit that it's his program. But as soon as he's elected, surrounds himself by the very architects of the program that he denied during the election was his. He's now nominated the very people who wrote the playbook for reshaping our entire democratic republic into their dystopian image. This is radical. This is extreme. This is undemocratic. And I dare say that the people of Georgia who elected me and the people of Georgia who elected Donald Trump did not vote for this. But just as we warned, his dangerous plans are playing out in real time. This is exactly what they said they were going to do. Some didn't believe them. Even after they attempted to gaslight the American people into thinking otherwise, here we are in no time flat. Now, I believe in democracy. I often say that democracy is the political enactment of a spiritual idea, the notion that each of us has within us a spark of the divine. And if we have a spark of the divine, if we were created in what theologians call the imago Dei, the image of God, we all ought to have a voice in the direction of the country and our destiny within it. And so I respect elections. They have consequences. I know as a result of what happened on November 5th, things will happen that I don't agree with. I'm not mad about that. I'll push and stand and speak about the direction I think the country should go in. But elections do have consequences. But people are tired of what happens here in Washington, D.C. What all of us ought to be able to agree on is that once we've gone through the legislative process, that process of 3 co-equal branches of government ought to be respected. I don't care if the president is a Republican or a Democrat. And so, there's no question that there's a lot of pain out there. The status quo was not and is not working for Americans. And that's been the case for a long time. Folks have seen wealth trickle up and pain trickle down. And they've seen an increasing disconnect between what they need from their government and what they're able to get from their government. We can't even get movement on the things that Americans on the left and the right agree on in this country. A Fox News poll reported, and you don't often hear me quote a Fox News poll. Fox News poll said that Americans on both sides of the aisle believe that we ought to have background checks. But after one school shooting after another, we can't get any movement on that in this chamber. It suggests that somebody other than the people is trying to own the democracy, squeezing the voices of the people out of their own democracy. That's why what's happening right now is so deeply concerning. And if you're not concerned, you're not paying attention. Billionaires surrounding Donald Trump are trying to own the democracy. They're trying to move the vision of this country away from citizenship to ownership. And vote as OMB director would be a disaster. It would be a disaster for the people who rely on crucial government programs to make life more affordable. I'm thinking right now about the veterans that I serve in a military state. They are the best among us. They deserve the best from us. They have been imperiled by the actions of the last 2 weeks. I'm thinking about families who need accessible child care. This stunt that was pulled a few days ago is a disaster for communities who want well-funded law enforcement, thriving businesses, safe roads and bridges. And as they attack federal workers, attack the government, they're trying to convince you that the government is some third entity outside of us. No, this is government for the people, by the people, of the people. Our democracy represents the highest of our aspirations, what we are trying to achieve together. And as we witness this assault, it is hitting Democrats and Republicans. Blue states and red states. As the people's voices are being squeezed out of their democracy. And so just last week, without even being confirmed, Vote orchestrated the effort to freeze federal spending as if this money is his money rather than our money, the people's money. Throwing programs from infrastructure upgrades to Medicaid to free school lunches to support for homeless veterans into chaos. How dare you take funds that are needed by the veterans of Georgia and all across this state? Those who fight for us should not have to fight with us to get what they deserve. With the power of the OMB, he would enact even more harmful policies. If he is behaving with this kind of reckless disregard for the law right now, what do you think he'll do if we confirm him? This is a dangerous disregard for the separation of powers that keeps our government in check and gives the people a voice through the people's house, a check on those who would recklessly exercise power. Vogt has made it clear that he feels the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, can turn on and turn off any spending by the federal government, ignoring the requirements that Congress, being directly elected by the people, decides where your tax dollars can go. In 2024, listen, in 2024, he even published an article stating we are living in a post-constitutional time. That's dangerous rhetoric from a dangerous man. I beg to differ. I believe in our Constitution. Hard fought and hard won. It's not a perfect document. We've had to amend it. Thank God for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, First Amendment. But he should explain what he means when he says we're living in a post-constitutional time. The Trump administration and its architects, including the nominee before us today, have a very simple playbook to shrink the federal government and to enrich themselves even at the expense of the American people and their financial security. You are witnessing the unfolding of the kleptocratic designs that they have on our republic. And God help us if we just stand by and allow it to happen. So what's their first step in getting that done? The Trump administration is telling civil servants like the people who inspect your food or monitor diseases like bird flu or care for veterans at the VA to accept a meager buyout or risk being fired. All while an unelected billionaire posing as co-president accesses your private data at the Treasury Department. Russell Vogt said in 2023 that he wanted federal workers to, quote, be traumatically affected. That's what he said about your neighbors. That he wants them to be traumatically affected, and when they wake up in the morning, he said, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. They're saying the quiet part out loud. Well, I've got news for Mr. Vogt. The people who staff our VA hospitals are not villains. The people who keep our food safe so much that we Americans don't even think about it are not villains. The people who keep our water clean are not villains. The people who keep our military bases operating are not villains. A couple of days ago, my office started to receive a flood of calls from federal employees, friends of mine who do great work at the CDC and other places called me directly. Folks who do noble work every single day. Out of a deep sense of patriotism, certainly not pay. Out of a deep sense of commitment to the covenant we have with one another. In the wake of this assault, they began to call. These are folks who, in their moment, are finding themselves attacked by dangerous and dystopian designs on our country. Folks demanding that the workers just quit. Well, to all the federal workers listening right now, let me say to you that not only do they want you to quit, more importantly, they want you to surrender. And you must never, ever surrender. You must never give in to the forces that would weaponize despair so that they can have their way and create a country that we will not even recognize. This is the people's house. This is the people's democracy. And the people have to stand up and say it belongs to us. Even the people with whom we disagree, this is our house. The democracy is the framework in which we get to fight, in which we get to have the great arguments, about guns and butter, about how to spend the budget. We get to have these robust family arguments, and they get rambunctious from time to time in order to avoid violence. That's the American way. What we are seeing over the last 2 weeks is its own kind of violence. The pardoning of those who attacked this House on January 6th, the permission structure to do it again, the gaslighting, telling federal workers who are working hard for you on one day don't come to work the next day, that is its own kind of violence. And it must be condemned by all Americans who believe in the covenant we have with one another. And so when we're talking about federal workers, we're talking about hardworking folks I know. Don't allow them to turn these people into some vague and nebulous, dark picture of somebody you don't recognize. These are your neighbors. These are the folk who are practicing medicine and nursing care in our VA hospitals. These are those who manage our Social Security payments. These are the folks who are keeping our military bases operating safely and efficiently, ensuring folks get their tax returns on time, helping Georgians navigate their student loans, keeping our airports operating safely, providing critical support for our children, assisting farmers with loans, protecting our public health system and our public schools, eradicating diseases that know no borders, protecting our clean air and water. These are your neighbors. These are your family members. These are not villains. Always be wary of politicians who tell us to be afraid of each other. They're the ones you should fear and be concerned about. These are people throughout Georgia, our nation's capital, and scattered across the country, dedicated to healthy and safe communities and helping build that more perfect union we claim to aspire to. And so to these public servants who quietly and nobly do the people's work day by day, know this: I appreciate you. We appreciate you. And we've got your back because in so many ways, you've had ours. But these tens of thousands of Georgians are now living in fear that their ability to support themselves and their families are at risk. Just today, dozens of Georgians visited my Atlanta office, some of whom have already lost their jobs through the abrupt dismantling of USAID, and they are worried about how they will keep their lights on and take care of their children. Young woman came to my office yesterday, a single mother, works for USAID, doing noble work. It is indeed a humanitarian cause, care for the sick, the poor, the most marginalized members of the human family. It is that, to be sure, but it is national security. It is keeping us safe as Americans. And it is a smart investment. It is less than 1% of the budget, 1/2 of 1%. For that, we get programs like PEPFAR, program that is perhaps the greatest humanitarian relief program in human history, saving millions of lives on the African continent, which pays dividends for us. These diseases know no borders. This young woman that I met yesterday came to my office, single mother. She was doing her work one day, and then she went to the doctor, and the doctor saw something in her test that was concerning and said, I need you to come back in a couple of days and get some more tests. And in between those days, she got noticed and lost her job and her health insurance. She deserves better than that. My mama taught me to treat people with respect, with human dignity. To know that when you look in the face of your neighbor, you see the image of God. Surely people who've been working for us deserve better than that. So people are anxious. People are concerned. Know that you are valued and that we'll continue to stand and fight on your behalf. But not only are the careers of these federal workers on the chopping block, so too is the federal funding that helps all of our communities and local economies run smoothly. My constituents were deeply shaken by last week's federal funding freeze. I received thousands of calls and emails from folks afraid of the freeze's unknown harm to their community. So let's peel back the curtain even more on what happened over the last few days. The Trump administration froze trillions of dollars in government spending to enact massive and disruptive funding cuts. These cuts are being orchestrated in part by Russell Vogt in partnership with the world's richest man, Elon Musk, the co-president, this unelected, unvetted bureaucrat who by my best guess appears to think that the livelihood of Georgians and Americans is some kind of startup he can tear apart. So if you want to get a sense of who President Trump is looking out for, look at who he's surrounding himself with. On that stage when he was inaugurated, you saw them, some of the richest people in the world. They were the ones who had proximity. Well, proximity matters. You can tell a whole lot about the character of a person's public service based on the people who can get close to them. The folks who get to speak into their ear. If you want to know who Donald Trump is working for, look who he's surrounding himself with. The likes of Elon Musk, the billionaire, the richest man in the world, who's now telling us, the rest of us, that we need to tighten our belts. How quaint. President Trump isn't serving you, he's serving them. He's serving those in our country who are well off and who don't play by the rules, and putting at risk basic programs that help folks send their kids to school, keep food affordable, and lower their energy bills. In fact, the other day, as a member of the banking committee, I asked President Trump's nominee for Treasury Secretary, who manages the finances for the entire United States government, if in the administration's supposed quest to cut federal spending and give it back to the American people, would he agree with allowing the Trump tax cuts to expire for the wealthiest Americans? If you're concerned about the federal deficit, are you willing to let the tax cuts put in place by Trump during his first term to expire for the wealthiest of Americans? Perhaps we could return to the tax policies that we had during the Bush administration, even if just by $1. And when I asked the nominee that question, now Secretary Bessent, he said, no, we can't afford to allow those tax cuts to expire. I said, what about folks making over $400,000 a year? He said, no. I said, what about millionaires? He said, no. I said, well, what about billionaires? No. So when Elon Musk and his billionaire buddies go looking for spending cuts, and they're focused on cutting government waste, they start by targeting the working class. They target the people who work the hardest and play by the rules. He said he couldn't cut taxes for billionaires because they are the job creators. What about the folks who just work on a job day to day? What about the folks who clean hospitals, who mop floors, who pick up our garbage, who do a day's work for an honest pay? Why is it that those at the top deserve so much more than those who are working at the bottom? Those in the middle. Hardworking Americans who play by the rules. Already we've seen Secretary Bessent give the world's richest man the keys to the kingdom, allowing him to prowl around in the sensitive data and systems of the Treasury Department. Who ever heard of any such thing as this? What is a billionaire doing with access to the system that handles grandma's Social Security check? Look, I will work with anyone who is able to have a serious bipartisan conversation about how to best utilize government resources and taxpayer dollars. Working across the aisle to get good things done for Georgia has been a cornerstone of my service in the Senate over the past 4 years. I'm listed as one of the most bipartisan senators in the Senate. I've worked with Republicans many, many times. But right now, the playbook is obvious. Cut programs that you rely on and give the richest of the rich the money. Robin Hood in reverse. Steal from the poor, give to the rich. And as this plan unfolds at a breakneck pace, I think it is important that Project 2025, it is important that we remind people that Project 2025 aims again to shift our democracy from citizenship to ownership, to shift the president from citizen to owner. Donald Trump, the real estate developer, and his billionaire friends wants to own the country. Last night he suggested that we should own Gaza as well. Imagine that. Here's what else they have in store under Project 2025 and its leader, Russell Vogt. Increase costs for families by $4,000 a year by slapping a Trump sales tax on goods that families rely on, like gas, food, clothing, medicine. Cuts to Social Security and Medicare, hurting hundreds of thousands of Georgia seniors. Elimination of federal funding for K-12 education, impacting Georgians from the heart of Atlanta to our rural counties all across our state. Tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations while making working families foot the bill. Gutting the Affordable Care Act, which will raise health care premiums and threaten coverage for hundreds of thousands of Georgians and millions across the country. Their program would end student debt relief that ensures their student loan payments don't consume the entirety of their paychecks. Their plan would reverse provisions of a law I secured that is capping insulin at $35 for seniors and lowering prescription drug costs. And their program would eliminate Head Start, which provided me with an early childhood education when I was growing up in public housing in Savannah, Georgia. I stand tonight on the floor of the United States Senate, but I want you to know that you're looking at a Head Start kid. I know it works. This program that gives poor children a chance, which exposes them as preschoolers to literacy and a love of learning, which narrows the word gap between poor children and well-off children and puts them on the road to success. Head Start is a worthwhile investment. It is a recognition that God is an equal opportunity employer, that God creates genius and talent and possibility on all sides of town, on both sides of the track, and you never know where the very person we need to do the work that needs to be done, we never know what zip code that kid will grow up in. And so we have to invest in Head Start. To cut it is short-sighted. But not only that, we have to invest in all of these programs that provide a child care safety net, so mamas and daddies can go to work and children can be safe and thrive and be exposed to learning and literacy. And so I was deeply moved when I began to get calls from folks involved in providing child care to our kids all across our state. Child care centers in neighborhoods, some forgotten, where people get up every day and go to work and they do their best. I heard from Sweetie Pie's Learning Center in Macon, Georgia. They rely on federal funding for child care services. But this freeze meant that they missed their regular check that covers food costs, which left employees scrambling to make plans on how they can make ends meet while still caring for children in this community. I'm thinking now about the folks I heard from in Learning Hive in Lawrenceville, another child care center, navigating this chaos. Delayed payments for child care and parent services. And if the freeze remained in effect, they would only have enough money to make payroll for 2 weeks. 2 weeks until your child is without care. Think about that. As myself, a working father of 2 young children, I cannot imagine the stress and the confusion that would bring. To put food on the table, keep a roof over your heads, and make sure your kids have a safe place to learn and play while you make it happen. I'm thinking about the folks at Easter Seals Child Care Center in Clarkston, who are counting on this funding also for fresh meals for children living at 100% below the federal poverty level. These kids risk going hungry in the wealthiest nation on the planet. So let me be clear. Project 2025 is no longer theoretical. It is unfolding right before our very eyes in real time. We are seeing these policies implemented every day, and the president who claimed to disavow Project 2025 is putting its chief architect in charge of administering the federal budget. But we must not give in. We must not give up. We must not let those who would weaponize despair win. For many, it's dark right now. But my faith teaches me that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness overcometh it not. And so let me say that even in a time like this, I am incredibly and immeasurably blessed because I get to do this work. I get to wake up every single day thinking about what I can do for the people who gave me the great honor of representing them in the nation's capital. It is a great honor. When the people of your state say, since all of us can't go to that crazy place called Washington, D.C., we're going to send you. And we're going to trust that in rooms of power, where decisions are being made and deals are cut, you're always going to center the concerns of ordinary people. You're not going to forget about us. And so I'm honored that people all across the state of Georgia, from Bartow to Brantley County, when they took stock of the hopes for their families and their children and their grandmothers and grandfathers, they said again and again, we want you to go to Washington to fight for us. I'll tell you that for me, that is a sacred covenant, not much unlike my first job, pastor. The promise to walk with the people even as you work for the people. And part of the reason that Georgians have again and again voted to send me to Washington is that they know that I will fight for them. But they also know why I will fight for them. As a pastor in the Senate, Georgians know that I bring the moral lessons from my pastoral work with me to the Capitol every single day. And so I'm going to keep fighting. I'm not going to stand by and allow folks to undo what we did to cap the cost of insulin. Why? Because as a pastor, I have spent countless days in hospital rooms. I've seen up close what diabetes untreated can do. I've seen the amputations. I've been there when folks have gotten the news that they've got to go on dialysis. When you need your insulin, you need your insulin. It's not a luxury, it's a requirement. And so that informs my fight. When I cast my vote to fund programs that range from supporting law enforcement to veterans, from making food and housing more affordable to ensuring every kid has a fair shot at making it on a college campus or a technical college, I see these votes as an extension of my pastoral work. My work to create what Dr. King called the beloved community. A world where everyone is cared for and all of God's children can thrive. It is an honor when the people send you here to represent ordinary people. And that is why I take such great offense to the illegal and immoral actions that I've seen over the last few days to try and freeze federal funds that center the needs of ordinary people for the purpose of enriching our country's wealthiest individuals. I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was sick, and I was in prison, and you didn't visit me. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. And then there are those who will ask the master, Master, when were you hungry? When were you thirsty? When were you sick with a pre-existing condition and nobody came to see about you? When were you in prison? When were you a stranger, an immigrant? The answer of Matthew 25 says, inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it also unto me. Representing the people is holy work, is noble work. And I return home to Georgia every week, and I return to my pulpit every Sunday because I don't want to forget why I came here in the first place. To stand up for the very people who Mr. Vogt says are villains. We all know that Donald Trump has a history of bailing on debts and shorting people of what they are owed. But our government is supposed to step in to protect hardworking individuals from bad actors who seek to take advantage of people. Yet we're seeing those bad actors fill our government's most powerful positions, playing fast and loose with taxpayer dollars at the expense of ordinary people. This is not how the most powerful government in the world ought to serve its people. The reality is this new level of Washington's dysfunction has real-world consequences that extend beyond Washington politicians. Georgia's economy does not stop just because Washington is exercising a kind of chaos. While we're trying to get our act together up here, guess what? Farmers still need crop insurance. Child care workers and community health centers still need to make payroll. Our roads and our bridges and pipes still need repairs. When federal investments are put in limbo, the stability of our states and local communities are also put in jeopardy. And let me be clear, the Trump administration has demonstrated that it will try this again and again and again, and when they do, the business community will suffer and Georgians will be out of their jobs unless we stand up and say no. If this federal funding freeze continues as Russell Vogt hopes, the impact will be felt hardest by those who can least afford it. It's easy in all the bluster of the Beltway to forget who is actually bearing the brunt of Donald Trump's actions. Delays in funding are not just inconvenient. They create anxiety, instability, and they cost the jobs of our friends, our families, and our neighbors. And be very clear, this is all unconstitutional. So why are so many of our colleagues across the aisle surrendering their constitutional responsibility that their voters elected them to carry out? When my colleagues remain silent while this new administration breaks the law, they are sacrificing their duty to their constituents in service to one man occupying 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Well, I don't work for him. And I don't work for some oligarch threatening to run for my seat or run somebody for my seat. I work for the people of Georgia. And it's this obsession with power. It is this obsession with election, the next election, that has left us in this place in which we find ourselves tonight. And so it's up to us in this moment to stand up. I am listening to the people who sent me to represent them. I'm thinking about those who do the work every single day. It is our job to respond to the call and the urgency of this moment. History will not treat us kindly if we are silent at a time like this. In closing, and nobody believes a preacher when he says in closing, but I think my colleague is ready. But in closing, Senator, I was thinking the other day about the dark challenges that your people have been through. And during the era of the Third Reich, and I'm never quick to raise the specter of that ugly time, but there was a pastor by the name of Martin Niemöller, who in the midst of the ugliness of that dark time said, first they came for the communists and I didn't speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me. And there was no one left to speak out for me. When they come for one of us, they come for all of us. Dr. King said, we're tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Ironically and tragically, we learned from COVID-19, a deadly pandemic airborne, that if my neighbor is sick, not only is she sick, I'm potentially imperiled. That doesn't make my neighbor my enemy. That means that in my enlightened self-interest, I ought to be concerned about her health care. I ought to want her to be covered so I can be covered. We're all in this together. And so we must stand up in this defining moment and resist those who would have us to be afraid of one another because of our differences, because of our diversity, and know that we are one people. That's the American way. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
And then that fateful day, January 6th, he has been a friend of mine for a long time, and I think he might be the only person in this body. I started this talk 13 hours ago by talking about getting into good trouble. I think you might be the only person in this body that was arrested in this building for protesting before you came to serve in this building as the United States Senator. I'm going to stick to what I'm told to say. If you ask me, you'd like to speak, you have to say it. I'd like to ask you a question. I think that's how this goes.
Will the senator from New Jersey yield for a question?
Why, yes, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Well, good morning, and let me just say, Cory Booker, how very, very proud I am of you. It's a real honor to serve in this body. I know that all of my colleagues who are here agree that it's an honor for the people of your state to say that when we take stock of all the issues that we wrestle with as we look into the eyes of our children and consider what we want for them, and in the eyes of our aging parents as they deal with the blessings and the burdens of getting older, that since all of us can't go to Washington, we're going to send you. And we're going to trust that in rooms of power, where decisions are being made, that you're going to center the people and not yourself. You're going to be thinking about ordinary people. And so, Cory Booker, I want to thank you for holding vigil. As I prepare to ask you a question, I just want to thank you for holding vigil for this country all night. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said that when he marched with Dr. King, he felt like his legs were praying. And so in a very real sense, your legs have been praying as you've been standing on this floor all night. And thank you for praying not just with your lips, but with your legs for a nation in need of healing. I just got off a prayer call that I do every Tuesday morning at 7:14 a.m., 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name would humble themselves and pray, if they would seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins and heal the land. The nation needs healing. And we need spiritual healing, we need moral healing, but literally there are people all across our country who need healing, who need health care. And so that's why I was so proud to come to this Senate after being arrested in the Rotunda a few years before that. Proud to join you in the Senate. Proud that we were able to pass, just a couple months after I got here, the American Rescue Plan, which did so much incredible work. In that American Rescue Plan, there was the expanded child tax credit, which literally cut child poverty more than 40% in our country. I wish we could get it extended. But one of the other things we did was we lowered Georgians and Americans' health care premiums by hundreds of dollars on average. We passed a tax cut, and that's so relevant in this moment because that's what this body is prepared to do right now, I guess, in the next few days. Pass a tax cut, but that tax cut is literally going to be for the richest of the rich, the wealthiest among us. But we passed a tax cut that brought health care into reach for tens of thousands of Georgians and millions of Americans in the American Rescue Plan. These tax credits are so critical that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said that the number of Americans without health care would grow by 3.8 million people in just 1 year if the premium subsidies were allowed to expire. Forgive me for my phone ringing. My 8-year-old and 6-year-old are calling me. They're not impressed with what I'm doing.
That's an important call.
They're not impressed. But we know that this would impact thousands of Georgians who've only recently been able to receive health care. So we passed in that American Rescue Plan these tax credits which put health care in reach. And now they're set to expire if we don't do our work. And that's why what you're doing, Cory Booker, is holy work. It's within a political context, but this is holy work. If these tax credits are allowed to expire, a 45-year-old in Georgia with $62,000 annual income would see premiums go up by $1,414 a year. A 60-year-old couple in Georgia with an $82,000 annual income would see premiums go up by a staggering $18,157 a year. Think about that. Nearly 1/3 of Americans have less than $500 in savings in their bank account. Imagine the health care costs for a 60-year-old couple going up by more than $18,000. A health insurance premium hike like this would be more than an inconvenience. It wouldn't just be a nuisance. It's literally the difference between having health care coverage and not having health care coverage. And so I'm thinking about people like that. And I'm thinking about my constituent, Cassie Cox from Bainbridge, Georgia. She wasn't able to afford health care on the Affordable Care Act marketplace until the premium tax credit brought health care into reach. And shortly after she became insured, she severely cut her hand, which landed her in the emergency room with 35 stitches. And with insurance, it still cost her about $300. Had it not been for the tax credits that allowed her to get health care, she could have been in financial ruin. She's one of the hundreds of thousands of Georgians at risk of losing their coverage if these tax credits are allowed to expire, if we don't do our work. If we're more focused on the wealthiest of the wealthy rather than the concerns of ordinary people. Senator Booker, should Democrats and Republicans come together to extend the premium tax credit for hardworking folk in New Jersey and in Georgia? What do you think?
My easiest colleague question I've gotten over these 13 hours. Yes, they should. I was talking in the healthcare section about, while there's these big issues that we should be concerned about, $880 billion from Medicaid, cutting all of that out to give the wealthiest, as you said, God bless them, they don't need our help. They don't need more tax cuts, to give them tax cuts and explode the deficit. This is literally taking from working Americans. The letters we read, the voices of Americans, the fear, the anguish, the hurt, the worry, people who were suffering from Parkinson's, who had children with disabilities, who had elder parents living with them. So many people telling them, not $880 billion they were saying, that their whole financial well-being was hanging on a thread and just cutting the transportation programs involved. But I said, while all that was going on, the Trump administration was still doing other things to attack ACA enrollment, to attack the tax credits that people are relying on, doing other things to drive up costs. I know some of my colleagues were on the floor, like Amy Klobuchar. We've centered the lowering of prescription drug costs, and he is doing things to drive out-of-pocket costs up. There's a cruelty in that. And I tend to still be standing at noon when we have to pause in the Senate for the pledge and the prayer. And Pastor, I want to talk to you in the way that you talked to me last night. I called my brother, called my friend, and told him I was doing this. And Warnock shifts gears a lot in my life. Sometimes he's my colleague, sometimes he's my brother. Sometimes we talk about the state of two unmarried guys in the Senate. I don't mean to put you on blast, sir. But the bald-headed caucus. But the one time you shift those gears into being my pastor and my friend, we prayed together last night. And most Americans identify in our faith, Christian faith. And you and I know, I would yield for you to ask a question, but I'm yielding just to have you talk about Matthew 25.
Right. I'm a Matthew 25 Christian.
You and I both, that's what we hold in common.
And it's a long chapter, but the section we're talking about,
yes,
in Matthew 25, Jesus says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was sick.
What were you?
I was in prison, and you came to visit me, and someone asked, Lord, when were you sick? When were you in prison? When were you an undocumented immigrant?
Yes, yes.
And the answer comes, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it also unto me. Another part of that text says, and when you don't do it for the least of these, you don't do it for me. The scripture says that the one who gives to the poor lendeth to the Lord. This is holy work.
Sir, my friend, I don't understand how a nation could allow a president to be so cruel that he would take away health care from people struggling with children that are facing the worst of health challenges, people who have a spouse, like the person who wrote me. No, it wasn't the spouse. She wrote me herself. She had Parkinson's. I got upset because that's how my father died, and I watched for year after year after year how it affected my family, how it demanded from my mother, how it cost thousands of dollars for his care. And thank God we had the privilege, but this person was writing because they were afraid and they didn't, of what the costs would be. How can our country say that kind of cruelty? How can a nation where the majority of its people are people of faith, be they Muslims or Jain or Baha'i or Hindu or Jewish, how can the central precept of our country, founded on principles that are reflected in the good book, how could we say that we should cut health care from the sick and the needy to give bigger tax cuts to Elon Musk?
Well, the senator from New Jersey.
I will yield to you, my brother, while retaining the floor.
You know, this is the reason why every Sunday and every weekend when I leave here, I return not only to Georgia, but I return to my pulpit. And some folk ask, well, why do you continue to lead Ebenezer Church? I return to my pulpit every Sunday because, notwithstanding wonderful people like you, I don't want to spend all my time talking to politicians. I'm afraid I might accidentally become one. And so I want to connect and check in with ordinary folks because I was focused on this health care issue long before I came to the Congress. Dr. King said that of all the injustices, inequality in health care, he said, is the most shocking and the most inhumane.
I read that last night, Pastor. I read that last night.
The most shocking and the most inhumane. And it's the reason why, as a pastor, inspired by Dr. King, leading the congregation that Dr. King led, way back in 2014, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, were you here? You came after it?
I came after.
You came right after that. I got arrested in the governor's office in Georgia fighting for health care.
I didn't know you were a two-time arrestee, man.
I got a long record, brother. But all for good trouble. Good
all
trouble.
for good trouble.
Good trouble.
Good trouble.
And we had a 1960 sit-in in the governor's office. Waves of us got arrested. They arrested one wave, and then another wave came, and another wave came. And we were trying to get Georgia to expand Medicaid.
Yes, I remember that.
We had passed the Affordable Care Act here, but Georgia was digging in its heels and saying, no, we're not going to expand Medicaid. And so when I got here, Senator Klobuchar, I made it a priority of mine to get incentives for Georgia to expand Medicaid. And you remember, I went to our caucus.
Yes.
And I said, look, Georgia and about 9, then 10 other states have not expanded. They should have done it a long time ago. Let's see if we can make it even easier for them. And as a freshman senator, I was able to convince our caucus to give $14.5 billion for non-expansion states, which includes $2 billion just for Georgia, to incentivize Medicaid expansion. Why? So that working people in the gap, people who literally go to work every day, can get health care. Georgia has left that $2 billion sitting on the table and almost 600,000 Georgians in the gap. The governor's plan has literally enrolled a whopping 6,500 people in health care. But we've got nearly 600,000 people in the gap. And this is not theoretical stuff. Every time I talk about this, I have to talk about Heather Payne. Because Heather Payne is a resident of Dalton, Georgia. She spent her career taking care of others. She's a traveling nurse. Heather worked throughout COVID as an ER and labor and delivery nurse, yet often she did not have health care coverage herself because she fell into the health care coverage gap. Sometimes she had health insurance coverage, sometimes she didn't. She made too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but the only coverage options available to her were unaffordable, costing anywhere between $500 and $1,000 a month. And so about 2.5 years ago, Heather Payne, a traveling nurse, noticed that something was wrong in her body. And even though she noticed that something was wrong, Senator Klobuchar, she literally had to wait for months before she could see a doctor to save up the money. And then she finally went and saw a neurologist who said, you know what, you've actually had a series of small strokes. And even after getting that diagnosis, she had to put off serious medical procedures because she cannot work as an ER nurse anymore and is still waiting to get approved for disability so she can get Medicaid coverage. And so this nurse who has spent her whole life healing other people can't get health care. I think it's wrong that in the richest country on earth, we don't want to lower the cost of health care for people who are working hard in our communities every day, literally keeping us healthy. I'm going to ask you another softball question, Senator Booker. Should people like my friend Heather Payne have access to affordable health care?
Yes.
In the first few months of the Trump administration, it's been clear that this administration is not working for ordinary people.
Just to try to stay in the parliamentary zone, I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I yield for another question while retaining the floor.
The administration is working for billionaires. They're working for people like Elon Musk. Healthcare is a human right. Healthcare is basic. And while we're speaking about health, we've got to cheer on our federal workers who are keeping us healthy. And there are folks in this administration who say that they want to make them the villains. That's what Russell Vogt said, that when they wake up in the morning, we want them to not go to work. Our federal workers, because they are increasingly viewed, he said, as villains. I got news for Russell Vogt. The people who staff our VA hospitals are not villains. The people who keep our food safe and our water clean are not villains. The people who keep our military bases operating are not villains. And so we stand with them in this moment because they are indeed keeping all of us healthy. And so in closing, and nobody believes a Baptist preacher when he says in closing, let me say that, again, you're doing holy work here, brother, by holding this floor. You are literally holding vigil for our nation. We are beset by the politics of fear. The scripture tells us that perfect love casts out all fear. We are witnessing again this ugly game, the politics of us and them. And there are a lot of folk who, because so much of what has been going on in our nation across Republican and Democratic administrations, let's be honest, has not been working for ordinary people. And the gap between the haves and the have-nots has gotten larger and larger. And when people are vulnerable, sometimes they give in to the politics of fear, somebody telling them that they've got all the answers. And so we saw this in this last cycle. We're seeing it in this moment in our country, the politics of us and them. And sadly, hardworking, working-class people are waking up this morning and they're discovering that they thought they were in the us. And they're discovering that they're in the them, that the them is larger than they thought. And so we got to hold vigil for each other, for workers, for women, for immigrant families, for our sisters and our brothers, red, yellow, brown, black, and white, for the aging who need Social Security, for the working poor who need Medicaid, for those who are seeking asylum and they just need a dignified path, for those who've been working here for years and they need a dignified path to citizenship. We've got to hold vigil for each other. And so thank you for this work. This is not the end, but the beginning. The struggle continues. Dr. King said that the true measure of a person is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in moments of challenge and controversy. So thank you for praying for this nation with your lips and with your legs. And I'm going to ask you one last question. Do you intend to keep praying?
Amen. Hallelujah. Yes, I do. Thank you for that question. I know there's going to be a question coming to me. I just want to say, pray Isaiah 40:31 for me. I think you know what that is.
Got it. I'm going to ordain this man.
All right. The article I was going to start reading.
Senator Booker.
I yield for a question while retaining the floor. If the senator has a question, I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
So you'll yield for a question?
Yes, while retaining the floor, yes.
Very good. I want to, first of all, thank you. Thank you for waking us up this morning, literally. All night, as Reverend Warnock would tell you, I know you were in here doing your work, but it was raining, there was thunder, it was really bad. And then when we woke up this morning, you were still talking. You were still talking and the sun was out and you're giving people hope. When I think about what you're doing, you're like an alarm clock right now for this country. And slowly but surely, we've seen people realize this isn't just a bunch of campaign rhetoric that's going on. This is actually happening. And people are stepping up. They're fighting it in the courts. They're fighting it in Congress with what you're doing today, with what, as you know, last week when we got the horrible news that the Defense Secretary of the United States was using an unauthorized line to just talk with his friends like he was spiking a football about putting the lives of our service members at risk. People stood up. Democrats stood up. They asked the tough questions. And one of the things that bothers me is that it is so hard to see your way out of it. A lot of people feel like we're just wallowing right now. But what you're telling us today is there is another way. Because if we just wallow, these guys are going to continue to cut kids' cancer treatment. If we just wallow, they're going to cut Medicaid when 1 out of 2 seniors in my state who are in assisted living are on Medicaid. Or they're going to continue to mess around with these tariffs, which really are national sales tax, something like $2,500 for every single family. They are going to continue to be callous. I had someone say to me last night, do they care? Do they care when those U.S. aid workers who devoted their lives to feeding the hungry around the world, when they have to stand outside their building and watch them literally take the name of their life's work off the brick on that building? Do they care? And one of the things that we have done, the Democrats have done, have stood up. And what is coming upon us in these next few weeks is this tax bill that basically will give billionaires tax cuts on the backs of regular people, ransacking the government, firing veterans, messing around with Social Security. I had a guy tell me that he spent 3 days after his wife died in Minnesota, Reverend, 3 days just trying to figure out how he gets the death benefit. Why did this check show up at his door? He's trying to do the right thing. He calls, he gets put on hold. He sends an email, no one writes him back. He drives into Brainerd, Minnesota, 30-mile drive. He's like 80 years old. He drives in there, and then they finally help him. Then he gets back, then something else goes wrong. Then he tries to call again. He finally ends up at our door, at our office, and we figure it out for him. There's 70-some million people that's going to happen to. These guys don't get their act together. So it's a real good question, do they care? But when we have this tax bill coming up in front of us in these next few weeks, I think people got to understand what's going on. They have to understand that even in the House budget that came out that'll be the subject of this, it's over $2 trillion tax cuts for people making over $400,000 a year, like Elon Musk, that don't need it. And so there's actually a way to stop it that's in the hands of the Republicans right now. If just 2 or 3 of them stood up on the House floor and did what you did, Senator Booker, who they said no, and if 4 of them in the United States Senate, 4 of them stood up, 4 senators stood up, then we could have the discussion about, okay, let's make government work better, we're all in, but let's not do it on the backs of regular people. Let's not do it on the backs of kids that are in cancer research or veterans who are trying to simply get their well-earned benefits because they put their lives on the line in the battlefield. Or let's not do it on the backs of farmers in Minnesota and Georgia who are simply have these small farms and they're trying to get by, and then suddenly, wham, Donald Trump decides, shock and awe, let's do a tariff and let's get mad at all our allies across the country like Canada. Oh, that's a good idea. Those are the things that they're doing. So my question of you is, how many people need to stand up in the U.S. Senate to make this happen? Because I know Democrats are united. I know we're all standing up. But tell me how many people can stand up on the other side. If they stood up and joined you, what a difference it would make.
So I want to thank the senator for the question. And when I think of people who stand in adversity, I still see you standing in a snowstorm and the strength that you've had as you stood up to fight for affordable health care, stood up and fought for affordable prescription drugs, stood up and fought for farmers and for police officers and for communities. You are that kind of person that gives me strength, that I've learned so much from. And you have brought this issue up. What you just said on the floor, to let you know this is not performative for her. She has brought this up in our small meetings with Chuck Schumer. She has brought this up in our caucus meetings. I've seen her talk about it in her own state. This question of what will it take? And here's something that pains me to hear. That Elon Musk is calling Republicans up and saying, if you take this stand, I'm going to put $100 million in a primary against you. That they are bullying people who dare to stand up and say, maybe this appointee is not the most qualified person you could find to lead this cabinet position, or maybe it's wrong to cut this agency that we together created in Congress. There are people who are asking those questions, but we have seen them get dragged through X, mob attacked when it comes to their virtual presence, and threatened to be primaried. But we know, because you're somebody that works on both sides of the aisle, that there are really good people of conscience on both sides of the aisle. And as the great pastor said, there are enough sins in this body to go around for all of us. But this is not a partisan moment. It is a moral moment. This is not a left or right moment. It is a right or wrong moment. We have a president that is shredding the very agencies that Americans who are struggling are relying on. Working people that over the last 71 days are finding higher prices, that are finding housing prices going up. Farmers in my state too, it's our 4th largest industry. I've had farmers who'll come to me as far away as Texas and tell me that they're clawing back these contracts that we've already relied on to buy things already, and now you're putting me in a situation where I might lose my farm. You see veterans who come to our offices. I know they come to your office, Senator Klobuchar. You're a senator from Minnesota, but you are a national figure, so I know they're coming to your office. And they're saying things to me like, I'm a veteran. I could go do other jobs. I wanted to work on suicide prevention and mental health issues, and I'm being fired? And you said it right. I've heard you say it in private. I've heard you say it in public. I know it irks you because you're one of these sort of balanced people. Okay, we have a big deficit that is a real problem. Maybe they're trying to lower the deficit. But they're not. That's the irony. They're not. They're about to explode trillions of dollars, most of which disproportionately will go to the wealthiest people, as you've been pointing out in our private phone calls over and over again, Senator Klobuchar. And so your question to me is spot on. It's spot on. And it's why I am standing here right now at the top of another hour because of what you are saying relentlessly, persistently, and unyieldingly. Why are we hurting Americans from our farmers? We just talked about rural hospitals here for about 20, 30 minutes and what the threats are to them. We talked about rural social security centers and the threats that are to them. We talked about communities all over our country who are being hurt. And your question, why? To give tax breaks that will disproportionately go to the wealthiest Americans who, you and I are not those people that demonize wealth. We don't demonize success. I want more people to start businesses. I want more people to dream of moving on up like the Jeffersons. I want more people to have that vision. I am not one of those people that are going to be mad at you because you're very successful. I'm going to be one of those people that says, you don't need more tax cuts. And we as a society have an obligation to each other, to those farmers, to those rural folks, to the cops I stood with at the funeral of one of their colleagues in Newark 2 weeks ago. We have an obligation to them to help them get equipment, to protect themselves. This country cannot do something that is so monumentally, fiscally irresponsible. Who was the one person in the House that voted, a Republican that voted against it, a guy named Massey? And I watched it. I had to smile and laugh because he said the quiet part out loud. He's sitting there looking at something. I saw him in an interview, and he says, by their own numbers, this doesn't add up. They're adding to our deficit by the trillions. He stayed true to his principles. What happened to all those mighty deficit hawks in the House of Representatives on the Republican side that caved to the pressure of a president? I'm so happy you asked it in the right fashion, as I yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Very good. That was perfect. So I think one of the things you talked about was just this deficit and what's happening and what we're seeing with their proposal right now that's going to come right before us. By some estimates, it's going to add $37 trillion, $37 trillion in 30 years as we go ahead. I mean, I literally cannot believe that when, in fact, we could step back now and we could say, what things can we do? What things can we do on the tax code? Because there's a whole lot of things we can do to strengthen Social Security, strengthen what we have in our government. And what really, when you step back and look at the economy, and I heard this the other day on a business channel, just about a month or two ago, man, we were coming out strong. We are a country that came out of the pandemic in a stronger way than so many other countries did around the world. We're ready. Inflation was at least steady, and it was starting to come down here. And now all of a sudden, we see chaos is up, corruption is up, and yes, costs are up. Ask anyone at the grocery store. And one of the problems when you look at what we could be doing to address the debt is that the proposals out there are just going to make it worse. That means more interest payments. That means more interest payments on the backs of regular people, and that means less we can do to help them as we look at what's happening right now. And one of the things you raised, Senator Booker, which I appreciate how much you know about this, is just this prescription drug negotiation and Medicare. So what do we finally do? So decades before you or Senator Murphy or Senator Warnock got here, before I got to this place, they made a sweetheart deal with the pharmaceutical companies, and they actually baked in so that they didn't have to negotiate prices for 73 million people. And anything. They could just charge whatever they wanted for these prescription drugs. What happens? Well, guess what happens? Suddenly, the drugs for our seniors are 2 to 1 what they are in places like Canada, our neighbor, our friend. 2 to 1 what they are over there. You got people driving up to Canada from Minnesota because we can see Canada from our porch. And they are like going up there trying to get less expensive drugs. And then they figured, what's going on? So a whole bunch of people started to say, let's look at this. It took years to get this done. Finally, we passed a bill it said they've got to negotiate. And we took the first 10 drugs. And the last administration got to pick those drugs, and they picked blockbuster drugs. Drugs like Eliquis, drugs like Xarelto, drugs like Januvia, Jardiance. I memorize them because I can always find people that take them. I don't make them raise their hand, say they take them. But these are blockbuster drugs. And they reduced the price by like 70% for our seniors. That's going to kick in soon. But not if this administration messes it up. And for we have seen from everything from, giving signal lines about secret battle plans to reporters to deciding they're going to shut down the people that worked on protecting our nuclear facilities, and oops, we made a mistake. Or how about when they said, okay, we want to do something about avian flu, but we're going to fire all the people that work at, oh, no, we're going to fire them back. We're going to hire them back. That's what's been going on right now. So when I look at this really complicated prescription drug negotiation where you're taking on some of the biggest companies in the world, I say to myself, okay, so our Secretary of Health, Kennedy, he won't even agree, and when he's asked under oath if he's going to keep this up. They fired a bunch of people that would work on it. They haven't shown they're going to keep this negotiation going. Meanwhile, we've got put in place a $2,000 cap for our seniors out of pocket on drug costs under Medicare. That's really good. We put in place that insulin limit on $35 a month, and we thank Reverend Warnock, and we thank you, Senator Booker, Senator Murphy, everyone that worked on that. We got that in place. So now we got the big thing, which is the negotiation of all these drugs, because 15 more drugs are coming their way for negotiation. Again, blockbuster drugs, Ozempic, blockbuster drugs. Those drugs are coming their way for negotiation, but they have not committed to do that. They have not committed to do that. And even if they did commit to do it, do they even have the people to negotiate to take on these major companies? So my question of you, Senator Booker, after being up all night, after getting us through the storm of last night and into the bright sunshine of today, after holding the floor all this time, I can't even imagine how much your feet must hurt, but those feet hurting is nothing compared, which is why you're doing it, to how the rest of the people in this country right now feel and how they're hurting. My question is, how can they move forward without trying to save money for the people of this country? Because what I see happening, and there's so many signs, you see it every single day, when they are getting rid of some of these people that work on it, then you're not going to be able to get the Social Security for my friend that I met from Cross Lake, Minnesota. Then you're not going to be able to get that stuff done. But I think as we look at those cuts, it's not just the word cuts. What effect does it have on real people when they can't get their services? When our veterans, who also have complex ways that they've got to deal with the government, when they have no one answering the phone, when they've gotten rid of veterans who've actually done the work. So my question here is, for people to translate this into the real world, is what is all this going to mean for people in the real world, what they're doing right now?
I love, thank you for the question, Senator Klobuchar. I love that you're bringing back to real people and what effect it's having. And what you're spelling out is something that's really important. There's a strategy that they have expressly said they want to overwhelm you, not us. They want to overwhelm the American people. They want to flood the zone. And so I see a whole bunch of doing things to distract us. Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, Greenland, all these things to try to whip us up and not pay attention to what most Americans are concerned with, is can they make ends meet? Even the big reconciliation bill that they're going to try to do, that we have to find a way to appeal to a small group of Republican congresspeople to stop, of cutting $880 million out of Medicaid. We went through in great detail at length last night why that's bad, but you are pointing to something even more insidious. As that big thing is going on, they actually are cutting the support to get more people signed up with the ACA. Already happened. Make it harder to sign up for the ACA. They've already cut the tax credits that are helping people that are in the ACA get resources to help with their health care costs. They're going after these things. Here's one that you know really well. They're going after, as we talk about all of these parents struggling with children and family members with chronic diseases, we know one of the things that help people with chronic diseases is having access to fresh, healthy foods, but they're cutting access to that for our kids going to school. This administration has not only overseen in 71 days a rise in inflation, a rise in the cost of groceries, a lowering of people's 401ks with the stock market going down. It's not only bringing economic chaos, but they are already hurting people on their basic delivery of their services, from taking thousands of jobs out of Social Security, making it harder for people who have some problem to get it solved, to the VA, to the ACA.
Will the Senator yield for a question?
I will definitely yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I was thinking as you talked about the Affordable Care Act and all the work that went into it and what came out of it, I was remembering the constant attempts to repeal that bill. I was remembering when Senator John McCain, I think you were here for this, came in and kind of did the unexpected, right? He went in here, he bucked his party, and he said no. He didn't agree with Donald Trump about this. He didn't agree with his leaders on this. He did what he thought was right. And my issue is that we all have those moments where we have to make decisions about what we think is right. And I think about Donald Trump, and that's just this week, he said he wanted to violate the Constitution, which he says practically every single hour, but he said that he would try to serve another term, that he would do this, he would do that. He is literally treating this presidency like he's the king, and I guess Elon Musk is thus the court jester at his side, or the White House IT guy. But the point is that he's treating this like a king, and you serve on the Judiciary Committee. You know, you are a student of history. You're also a scholar in terms of understanding this government and how it works. And I think one of the things that's most unsettling for people that they just don't understand is how you could have a president in place that doesn't respect that democracy. I remember when we all gathered for the inauguration, and I had the 4 minutes because of my job with the Rules Committee to address those gathered in that rotunda. And I noted that our democracy can be a hot mess right now, but it's still the best form of government that we've got, that our democracy is truly our shelter in the storm. It's our shelter in the storm, to quote a great songwriter from the state of Minnesota. That the reason that we don't have, I know you may have a few songwriters from there, if the Senator could yield for one question, who is your best songwriter and singer from the state of New Jersey, just to make clear who is.
Oh, is that your question?
Will you yield for a question from me?
I will.
Yes.
I will answer that question by avoiding it, because in New Jersey there are so many great patron saints, from the great Bon Jovi to the great Bruce Springsteen to the incredible Queen Latifah, the chairman of the board from New Jersey, the great Frank Sinatra. So I'm not going to pick. We have so many great singers, rappers like Redman. We are just a thriving state of Count Basie. There's just too many. I would not force you to do that. Of course, it's Prince, I think, from your state. Prince.
Bob Dylan. But that aside, I'm very impressed, Senator Booker, that after 12 hours now, 13 hours, that you still are able to make sure that you mention every songwriter. But that aside, Bob Dylan once had that great line, "Shelter in the storm." Our democracy is shelter in the storm. And then I noted that day that in some countries, presidential inaugurations, they're held in gilded palaces, not in the United States of America. In the United States of America, it's held in the People's House. That's what you're doing right now, Senator Booker, because the People's House is where the action should be. That's Article 1. And the Constitution specifically says here, we have equal branches of government. And the final thing is that the power in that rotunda that day, and this is where we get into Donald Trump thinking he's king, the power of that rotunda didn't come from the people in there, it came from outside, came from the people. So that's why you see the people standing up right now, our constituents, going to these town halls, standing up, breaking the phone lines in the U.S. Senate, sending in the emails with their stories that we are able, that you've heard the senators and you have read on the Senate floor about things that have happened to your constituents. So that's the power from the outside. So the question that I ask of you is just tell me what you think people can do when you've got a president in there that, he thinks he is king, and he thinks that a democracy is just something that he can just shove aside and say whatever he wants and break whatever rule that people depend on, that they depend on to be able to vote, to be able to participate and have their case made. Tell me what you think. What's the answer to that?
Thank you, Senator. I'll answer that. And I see Ron Wyden has come to the floor, who's, for both Amy and I, one of the chair people or at this point ranking members of one of the great committees. To Amy Klobuchar's question, I read a lot of angry letters People who are demanding of me to do something to stop them, do something different. Stand up, speak up, Senator. I'm afraid. Stand up, speak up, Senator. I'm so angry. Stand up, speak up, Senator. The services for my disabled child are threatened. Stand up, speak up. So it's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, why my staff and I talked about this for so many days, to do something to let our constituents know, to elevate their voices on the floor, to read their letters, to read their statements, not just New Jerseyans, but like you, the hundreds and hundreds of people that are calling us from other states. But I am most moved by the letters who tell me about their pain or their challenges or their fears, but they end that question with your question. But I am here to help. Tell me how I can help. I am here to help. Tell me I can help. And you said it, Senator. I read the letter of John McCain last night. His letter explaining his vote. It was so beautiful. It was tough like he was. It was hard on the whole body. But he called to principles. Senator Schumer was here when I read it. It was eerie because he was describing what went wrong then, which is the same thing here, that we do need to make our country better. We do need to have a bolder vision for healthcare, a bolder vision for Social Security. We need to make them work for the people, but we're not doing it here in this body. And this man who's not acting like a president, but is trashing our constitutional traditions, is violating our laws as he's getting tied up in court, but ignoring court orders. And when he gets a decision he doesn't like, he trashes the judges so badly that the Supreme Court itself finds that it has to go out and tell him to stop it. What stopped health care from being taken away in the last time wasn't the persuasive powers of anybody in this side of the political aisle in the Senate convincing anybody over there. I would like to think it was my eloquence with Lisa Murkowski. I would like to think it was my high-minded intellect that somehow it was damaged playing too much football, but that somehow I got a right argument to Susan Collins. That wasn't it. I'd like to think it was my ability to stand up to John McCain himself. No, none of that. It was the people. It was the people. You remember the little lobbyists in their wheelchairs rolling up to senators and speaking their hearts, telling them of their pain and their fear. It was people coming here and marching, people coming and flooding the calls like they're doing now, people writing letters, people marching, people in their states from all political spectrums coming in and saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And so if you're asking me what we can do, I know what we can do, but we've got to, it's a great song. Senator Klobuchar, I had my staff print a bunch of things I sent them. I sent them because I knew they were some of my favorite people from history. There's one here, Webster. There's one by Jefferson. There's the letters from the Birmingham jail, Langston Hughes, something by Harper Lee, Emma Lazarus. But here's one. Here's the answer. In a poem, and forgive me for reading this. I wanted to do it at some point today, and this is perfect. And I see my senator here. He may have a question, but I love this poem. It was written and put to song by a man named James Weldon Johnson. He was an educator, a poet, a diplomat, a civil rights activist. He was born in the great state of Florida. And he said that this is what we have to do. Lift every voice and sing. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound like the rolling sea. We must sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on, let us march on, let us march on until victory is won. It doesn't ignore the wretchedness of our history. It speaks to the truth and the excitement and the hope about that past and the virtues that our ancestors gave us. He goes on, stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way with the tears, which tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last where the white gleam of the bright stars is cast. The last stanza. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the night, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God and true to this native land. What can we do? Is do like our ancestors did. What can we do? Do like the people who never gave up, who, even when this country that they loved didn't love them back, they kept fighting and kept pushing. And we know that, Senator Klobuchar, because we've witnessed that. In my time in the Senate with you, we've seen the most amazing, shocking moments within a Bergefeld case at the Supreme Court, recognizing the humanity, the dignity, and the equal rights of LGBTQ Americans to have love and marry. We've seen fights in this time that we've been here, where we've seen victories on health care that made such a difference in people's lives. We've seen the fights while we've been here, some of the most painful moments where we've seen the arc of the moral universe bent, not by the people here, not by the people in this body. You think we got suffrage because a bunch of men on the Senate floor said, okay, guys, come on, put your hands in here. Ready, give women the right to vote on 3. Ready, break. That's not how it happened. It's not how it happened. It happened because the power of the people is greater than the people in power. You think we got civil rights because one day Strom Thurmond, after filibustering for 24 hours, you think we got civil rights because he came to the floor one day and said, I've seen the light. Let those Negro people have the right to vote. No, we got civil rights because people marched for it, sweat for it, and John Lewis bled for it. And so I'm scared too. But fear is a necessary precondition to courage. I am angry too. But my mom told me, never let your anger consume you. Channel it, fuel it, so it can help your love be greater and stronger. Amy Klobuchar, that's what this moment needs. And our job in this body is to be truth tellers. Our job, just as you said so brilliantly, is to elevate the voices of the people of the country, because you're right, Amy Klobuchar, this is the people's house. It's Article 1 of the Constitution, and it's under assault. Article 1 is under assault. Our spending powers, our budgetary powers, the power to establish agencies like the Department of Education and USAID, it's under assault by a president that doesn't respect this document. And how do we stop them? I'm sorry to say we hold powerful positions, we are elected by great states, but we're in the minority right now, and you spelled it out at the beginning of your questions to me. It will take 3 people of conscience on that side. It will take 4 here. I'm going back to my book because there's somebody that you know. I don't know if my staff put it in at the last moment. Yes, they did. Margaret Chase Stevens, who you know. Margaret Chase Smith, excuse me. A U.S. Senator from Maine, a Republican. When a demagogue had rose in the land exploiting people's fear, deporting Jews who were not citizens of this country because they were accusing them of being communists, at a time that this body was being twisted and contorted to the will of a demagogue, where nobody had the courage to stand up. It was a woman from the Republican Party that stood, I don't know, somewhere in this body. Her feet might have been tired, her heart might have been hurt, she might have been afraid of the consequences to stand up to people preaching the Red Scare. But this woman in this body, rare thing in those years, this woman in this body who are founders, those imperfect geniuses that wrote this Constitution, the woman in this body who wasn't imagined by our founders, thank God they called upon us to make a more perfect union. and generations of activists finally made it real that women could serve in this body, she had the courage, the audacity to call her own party to task. I read her words. She said, "I don't believe that the Republican Party is any sense a party of fear, but I do believe that the Republican Party has made an alliance with the four horsemen of fear. The fear of communists, the fear of labor unions, the fear of the future, the fear of progress. I think it's high time that we remembered that we have sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution," she continues. "I think it's time that we remembered that the Constitution, as amended, speaks not only of the freedom of speech, but also the freedom of trial by jury." This great senator, this great Republican said, whether it is criminal prosecutions in a court or character prosecution in the Senate, there is little political distinction when the life of a person has been ruined. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism in making character assassinations all too frequently, those who, by our own words and acts, ignore some of the basic principles of what it means to be an American. The right to criticize without thinking the president is going to drag you from the Oval Office for criticizing him. The right to hold unpopular beliefs. That if you have beliefs that I find contemptible, it doesn't mean that I can disappear you from a city street. She goes on, the right to protest, that just for assembling and speaking up, that's not a right. To cut hundreds of millions of dollars to that university's science funding. The right to independent thought. The exercise of these rights should not cost one single American citizen his reputation or his right to a livelihood, nor should he be in danger of losing his reputation or livelihood merely because he happens to know someone who holds unpopular beliefs, like a law firm that represents suing the president and now has their very firm, their very livelihoods, the legal secretaries and others come after them. Margaret Chase Smith goes on to call her party to be a woman of conscience, to stand up and say, I quote, "The American people are sick and tired of being afraid to speak their minds, lest they be politically smeared as communists or fascists by their opponents. Freedom of speech," she says, "is not what it used to be in America. It has been so abused by some that it is not exercised by others. So, dear God, if I stand up in this body and say it is wrong to put Pete Hegseth in the cabinet as Secretary of Defense because he's unqualified, look at a Signal chat to see how unqualified he is." Margaret Chase Smith continues, "As a Republicans, I say to my colleagues on this side of the aisle that the Republican Party faces challenges today that is not unlike the challenges it faced by Lincoln back in the day. The Republican Party so successfully met that challenge that it emerged from the Civil War as the champion of a united nation. In addition to being the party which unrelentingly fought loose spending and loose programs. I doubt if the Republican Party could do so simply because I do not believe the American people will uphold any political party that puts political exploitation above the national interests. Surely we Republicans are not so desperate for victory. I do not want to see the Republican Party win that way. While it might be a fleeting victory for the Republican Party, it would be a more lasting defeat for the American people," she says. "Surely it would be ultimately be suicide for the Republican Party and the two-party system itself that has protected American leaders' liberties from the dictatorship of a one-party system." You ask me, Amy Klobuchar, what do we need to do? We need to call to the conscience of our comrades in the People's Branch and say, how could you go along with a reconciliation that will put trillions of dollars of debt on our children and our children's children? How could you go along with cutting $800 billion from Medicaid only to give tax cuts to the wealthiest, that disproportionately go to the wealthiest, how can you in good conscience, if you're a fiscal hawk, if you're a Christian conservative, how could you hurt the weak to benefit the rich and powerful? That is the answer to your question. The people of the United States of America, all of us, have to stand up and say, no, not on my watch. I'm a Republican, I'm a veteran, I'm a police officer, I'm a firefighter, I'm a teacher. Not in America. We won't allow this. We won't allow this. We won't allow this.
Will the senator yield, the senator from New Jersey yield for question?
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
I thank my colleague, and I have been listening to this, and a Herculean presentation for hours and hours, and your remarks reflect the urgency of our times, Senator Booker, and I thank you for it. Let me frame the question this way. I hold open to all town hall meetings in every county in my state each year. I've had more than 1,100 of them, and since Donald Trump took office, what we have seen in these town hall meetings is fear and terror, and I might add, record turnouts. You know, I was in a small town in Central Oregon recently, Sisters. We had almost 1,400, people here. And what people asked about, and you've touched on this morning, is, of course, Medicaid and Social Security, because these are programs involving health care and retirement that are really the connective tissue between the government and our people. And these programs make it possible for people to pay for essentials. They're not going to fancy places. They're buying groceries, they're paying rent, they're buying medicine. We had one separate town hall meeting, I say to my colleague, just with federal employees whose goal is to get out in the woods and help prevent fire in Oregon. I organized this meeting. They, too, are terrified. They've dedicated their lives to trying to help. Now, we serve the American people. And I'm telling you, I've seen service in action over the last few hours with your reflecting the urgency of our times. Our salaries are paid for by taxpayers, and I'm particularly troubled by the fact that we're getting all these reports that many senators are saying, I'm not going to do town hall meetings. They're on the other side of the aisle. As I said, I've had 1,100 of them, 10 of them so far this year. Seems to me that's refusing to answer to constituents. And you've been here all night, and you're setting a very clear example about what it means to push back against authoritarianism. So just like I have town hall meetings, my question to my friend from New Jersey is, what are you hearing from home? Pretty straightforward question, but it sure as heck is what the times are all about, because people are saying, what are you doing back there? What's important to you? And I talk about town meetings. I had a town hall, I say to my friend during the speech that was made on the floor of the House. I had 30,000 people participating. That's a lot for my small state. So I know what I'm doing, and I think the American people would like to hear a bit about what my colleague is hearing from his state and why it's so important that he's out here mopping his brow today, trying to stay on his feet, making the case for the urgency of our time. What are you hearing?
Thank you, Senator. I'm hearing a lot of fear, a lot of anger. I'm hearing heads of hospitals say that this is outrageous, the threats to our hospitals in New Jersey. I'm hearing heads of critical health services tell me what the Medicaid cuts will mean to their organizations. I'm hearing from Catholic priests that are doing extraordinary things in service of their communities. I'm hearing from citizens who are veterans who got fired from their jobs. I'm hearing from people, as I read letters from people who work in the Social Security agency, and what the chaos that's been created and the lack of the deteriorating service to seniors. I've heard from seniors who are terrified about what's being done to Social Security and how it might affect their lives. I'm hearing demands from our constituents, people demanding, Senator, that we do something about the outrages they're seeing. And I think that when I hear New Jerseyans, by larger and larger numbers, and I'll be back in my state. I know we were planning meetings and a town hall and a lot more this weekend. But I have to say, now more than ever, we need more of it. We need more of it. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I want to elevate those voices of my constituents. I want to tell the stories that my constituents are writing in about, and lift their voices and tell them that they're seen, they're heard. I've been going through section by section, as you pointed out, Social Security, section on health care, section on education and the Department of Education and the work that it does. I've been going point by point through. This is the agenda. I didn't know how much of I can get through. But we laid it out. We have binders for each one of these issues. Immigration, we went through. We have housing, the environment, farmers and food, veterans, the corruption that's been normalized by this president, the rule of law, public safety, all of the ways that we know that there is a crisis in our country, and we as a nation need to be more attuned to it and doing more to meet this crisis, to rise up and defend our country, defend our well-being. And all while things are happening that you know. You're the chairman of the Finance Committee, and you have these insights. We've talked about them, about what's about to happen in this reconciliation process. I mean, that's one of the most stunning things. It's almost immediate on this floor. I think we're going to see about the tariffs tomorrow and see how far the president will go, but we do know whatever it is, it's going to affect prices that are going to continue to go up for Americans, as inflation has continued to go up for Americans, as the stock markets continue to go down, as people's 401ks have lost so much money, the uncertainty I'm hearing from businesses in New Jersey, the chaos that they feel about the economy, the consumer confidence in this country has gone way down. If you ask the question, are you better off than you were 71 days ago? Not many Americans would say that they're better off. Their costs are higher, their groceries are higher. They're soon to see everything from car prices to food go higher. Their retirement security is under attack. Their health care is under attack. They're losing their Department of Education. They're less safe from infectious diseases abroad. There's so many things that we have to talk to and try to stop. And you're our leader on the Finance Committee, and you know that the tax thing they're trying to run through this now, I'm trying to get my head wrapped around these wacky parliamentary things that even the podcasts I listen to in the morning to inform me say they even spoke about this years and years ago, but they said, oh, this is too crazy, we can't do this. To try to tell the American people somehow that the trillions of dollars of tax cuts that we're going to give disproportionately to the wealthiest people of all, oh, there's nothing to see here that has a zero impact on the budget, so we can do it through reconciliation. That is the biggest hocus-pocus, manufactured artifice that I've ever seen to obscure the truth in America. That what the Republicans are trying to do is cut massively into health care for Americans in order to give tax cuts to the wealthiest, disproportionately to the wealthiest who don't need it, and to drive up the deficits, making our children and our children's children have a more dangerous economy and higher debt payments to make, debt payments that will skyrocket higher than any expense the government makes. We are literally about to see something go through reconciliation that threatens to sacrifice our children's future so that the richest of the rich can get richer. And so I know there's a lot of people who are angry, who are worried, who are feeling overwhelmed, who are struggling to make ends meet, but I know of only one way to do this, and I'm trying to do it myself, is to do things differently, to stand up, to speak up, to not act like this is just normal in our country. There's not a president from Eisenhower to Reagan to Bush on the Republican side that could ever imagine a day where in a UN vote we side with Russia and China against the Western democracies that we saved in World War II, that we stormed beaches of Normandy for, that we did the Berlin airlift for, that we did the Marshall Plan for. We designed the world order, and now we're turning our back on it. We designed the rules-based world order, and we're turning our back on those organizations. From trashing NATO to getting out of the World Health Organization to getting out of the group of countries coming together to deal with climate change. We're not leading the planet Earth anymore. Our allies are saying openly they can't trust us. The quotes are unbelievable by our allies. Generations of Americans all know one thing: Russia is our adversary. This principle was reinforced after Russia's brutal, unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. The American public knows a lot about Putin and his cronies and what they've done to the brave people of Ukraine. Russia has abducted over 19,000 children, taking them from their families and homeland. Russia has targeted civilians, bombing hospitals and schools, including a strike on a children's hospital during the supposed ceasefire negotiations just a few weeks ago. Russian forces have raped and assaulted Ukrainian civilians, and Russia has tortured prisoners of war. One would think, given all the horrors inflicted by Russia, that the United States would continue to treat Russia as the adversary and the pariah that other Western democracies treat it. But that's not what Trump has done. He's done the opposite. On the third anniversary of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, the Trump administration joined Russia and North Korea in voting against a UN resolution condemning the invasion that has killed over 12,000 Ukrainian civilians and injured 30,000. Imagine that. I had the foreign minister of a great ally in NATO in my office looking at me and saying, basically, what the heck? My friend Chris Murphy on the floor, we sit close to each other. He's further up the dais than me in foreign relations, and this stuff is insanity. Here's NBC News. President Donald Trump has said Ukraine, not Russia, started the war. He called Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, not Vladimir Putin. He called Zelensky a dictator. Meanwhile, Trump's administration is standing down on a suite of tough anti-Kremlin policies. In just over a month, Trump has executed a startling realignment of American foreign policy, effectively throwing U.S. support behind Moscow and rejecting the tight alliance with Kyiv, cultivated by former President Joe Biden. The extraordinary pivot has upended decades of hawkish foreign policy towards Russia that provided a rare area of bipartisan consensus in an increasingly divided nation. Trump's recent moves have drawn international attention, unsettling U.S. alliances, and thrilling conservative populists who favor a turn away from Zelensky. The new posture was put in stark relief on Friday during a tense Oval Office meeting. We all remember this. Between Trump and Zelensky, the leaders clashed in front of the press, raising questions about the future of American support for Kyiv. Alliances and partners around the world are our biggest strength against any U.S. adversary or competitor, from China to Russia to Iran to North Korea. We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, but our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand in alliance with those nations that share our values and are bonded to us and are committed to us. In fact, the only time Article 5 in the United Nations, that article that says that if one person in NATO is attacked, everyone is attacked, and they all join together, that one time it happened was 9/11, when our NATO allies stood up with America. And so look at NATO. It's been the bedrock of the international order for 80 years. It was created in 1949 by 12 countries, including the United States, to provide collective security, and in many ways to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. Since then, 20 more countries have joined NATO through 10 rounds of enlargement, bringing the total number of NATO countries to 32. The most recent additions were Sweden in 2024 and Finland in 2023, who applied to join NATO in 2022 after Russia invaded Ukraine, because those countries are realizing that the authoritarian dictator that Putin is, who threatens his smaller neighbors, those other nations have realized they should be standing with NATO. That we have a principle of collective defense, as I said, enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Collective defense means an attack on one ally is considered an attack against all allies. A strong NATO has made America safer and stronger and more prosperous. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle have recognized this. I've been in this body for 12 years. I've been told by people who I've learned from about foreign policy when I came here as a mayor and leaned on people like Chris Coons and leaned on people like Chris Murphy, leaned on people like John McCain, leaned on people like Lindsey Graham, leaned on people like Senator Rubio. He helped pass a law that enshrined congressional action before the president can withdraw from NATO. That law passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. 87 senators voted yes. Senator Rubio, now Secretary of State, said, and I quote, "NATO serves as an essential military alliance that protects shared natural interests and enhances America's international presence. Any decision to leave the alliance should be rigorously debated and considered by the U.S. Congress with the input of the American people." 2 weeks ago, though, on March 19th in 2025, in response to news that the Pentagon may give up the role of supreme allied commander in Europe, a position held by an American general since the NATO alliance was formed in 1949, Republican Senator Wicker and Representative Rogers signaled their oppositions in an extraordinarily joint statement warning to Donald Trump that change would, quote, risk undermining American deterrence around the globe. I want to read some of the comments of NATO partners about the damage that has been done in just the last 71 days of Trump's leadership in upending the world order that has helped to keep America strong and stronger and safer and more prosperous. The EU's top diplomat said the free world needs a new leader. Think about that. Think about that. The EU's top diplomat has said in response to Donald Trump that now the free world needs a new leader. Every president of my lifetime was seen as the leader of the free world, and now the rest of the free world, its top diplomat is saying it's time for that to change. The new German chancellor said, "My absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA." He went on to say, "I never thought I would have to say something like this on a television program, but after Donald Trump's statements, it is clear that the Americans, at least this part of the Americans, this administration, are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. Our ancestors saved Europe. Our ancestors stormed beaches in Normandy, paratrooped into Europe, liberated concentration camps. Our ancestors sacrificed blood and treasure for Europe. It turned Germany from one of history's worst despotic states into a global economic power and a democracy. We were there at the Berlin airlift. We were there for the Marshall Plan. And now Europe is saying it is clear that the Americas, at least that part of the Americas, this administration, are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. That is not true. That is not true. And as long as I have breath in my body and blood in my veins, I will join with the other people on both sides of the aisle. God bless you, Roger Wicker, for standing with the understanding that America is the strongest nation in the world, but our strength is multiplied and magnified when we stand with our allies from Germany to Japan, from Australia to Iceland, that when our country stands up, we don't bully our neighbors like Canada, we don't threaten our allies like Iceland, like Greenland, we don't threaten smaller, weaker nations like Panama, we don't upend the world order. Donald Trump does not speak for me. He does not speak for the traditions of this body. He doesn't speak for the people that are buried, Americans that are buried in fields in Germany and in France and all over Europe. Here is former Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's speech to NATO and the Atlantic Council. On April 4th, 1949, 12 democracies came together in the wake of 2 world wars and the dawn of a new Cold War, and they all remembered, as President Truman put it then, the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. That's what Truman said. They were coming together against the sickening blow of unprovoked aggression. You hear that, Putin? And so they vowed to stand together for their collective defense and to safeguard freedom and democracy across Europe and North America. They made a solemn commitment declaring that an armed attack against one ally would be considered an attack against all. Now, that commitment was enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty. It was the foundation of what NATO, of NATO, and it still is. And on that bedrock, we have built the strongest and most successful defense alliance in all of human history, and I'll say one of the most prosperous blocs of democratic countries. Throughout the Cold War, NATO deterred Soviet aggression against Western Europe and prevented a Third World War. In the 1990s, NATO used air power to stop ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo. And the day after September 11th, 2001, when Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked our country, including slamming a plane into the Pentagon not far from here, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in history.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield for a question while retaining the floor. I yield to one of my best friends in the Senate. I yield to one of the smartest guys I know. I yield to the guy who handed me the chairmanship of the committee that oversaw world public health and Africa, and still reminds me that he knows more Swahili than I'll ever know. I yield to the guy who, when he speaks up in the Senate, people on both sides of the aisle listen. I yield to my friend who has real friendships, who when I came to and said, we are seeing the worst famines on the planet Earth, that Joe Biden didn't put enough money into the world feeding programs, he went to another appropriator over there, another friend of ours, Lindsey Graham, and together we got billions of dollars of more that saved hundreds of thousands of lives. You are a prince of a man. You are my friend. You are somebody that is a hero who folks don't know their name in the countries that you have affected with your strength on foreign policy. Dear God, my friend, I yield the floor for a question while retaining the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, I rise tonight in strong opposition to this awful and frankly immoral budget. Recently, I was appointed to the Finance Committee of the United States Senate. And the reason why I wanted to serve on that committee is because I wanted to get a chance to shape the nation's budget. As I thought about all of the things that I have fought for long before I came to the Senate, access to health care, access to learning and early education for all of our children, ensuring that people could retire with dignity. As I thought about the things that I cared about, I wanted to serve in a place where I might have an impact on a nation's budget. And that is because, for me, a budget is not just a fiscal document, it's a moral document. It's not just numbers and figures. It's not just dollars and cents. Show me your budget and I'll show you who you think counts and who doesn't. Show me your budget and I'll show you what you think matters and what doesn't. Show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And I have to say that if this budget that is being proposed were an EKG, it would suggest that the United States Congress has a heart problem and is in need of moral surgery. Why else would you propose, among other things, to cut up to $880 billion from Medicaid? I could talk about many aspects of this budget tonight, but I'll just stick with Medicaid. The programs that provide health care to the most vulnerable citizens, to children, to the severely disabled, to seniors in nursing homes. In fact, 71% of all Medicaid enrollees in Georgia are children. 71%. And I think it's important to underscore that, because sometimes when we use these terms, Medicaid, there may be folks at home wondering, well, who are we talking about? Who are these people? Well, 71% of them are your children. And so this budget is dangerous. It is cynical. It is wrong-headed. I believe in addressing waste and fraud and abuse, and I would sign up quickly to deal with that in our government. But there isn't enough waste, fraud, and abuse to cut $880 billion out of Medicaid. And that's not just me saying that. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said that the proposed GOP budget would require cuts to the Medicaid people rely on. And so don't be fooled. Don't be tricked by the funny math, by the games to cover up what's really happening here. And if I were them, I'd be ashamed of it and trying to hide it too. But they can't hide from the fact that they are about to take health care away from children. It's really that simple. And so why? Why are we cutting access to health care? A human right to 1.3 million children in Georgia, 250,000 Georgia seniors, over 37 million kids nationwide, 9.3 million seniors nationwide. Why should they go to bed tonight wondering if the Congress is getting ready to pull the rug out from under them? Well, the answer is sadly very simple. To pay for tax cuts to the richest of the rich, all the while adding $5 trillion to the nation's debt. Think about that. A plan that would cut health care to our most vulnerable citizens, including children living in the dawn of life and elders living in the twilight of life, while adding $5 trillion to the nation's debt, $37 trillion potentially over 30 years. And so we are taking health care for children and then burdening them with the consequences of this terrible decision. And so I rise tonight just to say that America is better than this. This is not who we are at our core. And the data demonstrates that the people at home, ordinary folks, don't want this. This is symptomatic of the ways in which the people's voices have been squeezed out of their democracy, and the folks who are sent here to represent them are representing other interests. And that's why every Sunday I return to my pulpit at Ebenezer Baptist Church. I'm blessed to stand there. I'm the preacher, but it's good to be in that atmosphere. It reminds me what ordinary people look like and their concerns and their needs. And sometimes when I stand in that pulpit, I'm reminded that Martin Luther King Jr., who was co-pastor, said that of all the injustices, inequality in health care is the most shocking and the most inhumane. It's the honor of my life still to stand there and preach every Sunday. The gospel tells us about a man who healed the sick, even those with pre-existing conditions, and never billed them for his services. And that's why I'm a Matthew 25 Christian. My work is informed by the words of that gospel, for I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, I was naked and you gave me clothing, I was sick and you took care of me, I was in prison and you visited me. And some asked the master, when were you hungry? Lord, when were you thirsty? When were you a stranger? When were you sick? And the answer came, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it also unto me. This is not, for me, simply a policy argument. It is a moral discussion. It is about who we are fundamentally. What is the character of our nation? To center the 41% of Georgia children who rely on Medicaid, I think that's what keeping the faith looks like. To center the exhausted mom who is working multiple unpredictable jobs but still needs Medicaid to get the health care she needs. Many of the folks who need Medicaid go to work every day. In Georgia, the 600,000 folks who are in the Medicaid gap, for all of this talk about work requirements, the overwhelming majority of those folks go to work every day, or they're in school, or they're taking care of a disabled person. Keeping the faith means centering the Georgia seniors who rely on Medicaid to cover the cost of living in a nursing home. That's why in 2017, years before I knew I would even run for political office, let alone serve in the Senate, I came to this building, but I came as a faith leader. I came with other faith leaders across various religious traditions and people who claim no particular faith tradition but are people of moral courage, and we gathered in the rotunda. They were discussing back then another reconciliation bill. Once again, that bill would cut the social safety net programs like Medicaid and food assistance. And so we came here to bear witness to who we are at our best as a nation. And as we gathered in the rotunda, the Capitol Police gathered, and we were singing and we were praying, and they said, sorry, but you can't sing and you can't pray in the rotunda. I thought to myself, somebody needed to pray. And they said, respectfully, we'll give you 3 warnings, and if you don't move, we'll have to arrest you. What they didn't understand was that I had already been arrested. My mind and my imagination had been arrested by the words of Dr. King, who taught us that the true measure of a person is not where He or she stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but in moments of challenge and controversy. We're tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. My mind had already been arrested. My moral imagination had been arrested. And so that felt like a small price to pay. And so I call on the people who are at home to call your senator, call your congressperson, tell them that this is not right, it's not fair, it's not true to our highest values. There's some 2,000 verses in Scripture that tell us how to treat people who are in need, how to treat the poor. And maybe that's why faith leaders all across the state of Georgia have been reaching out to me in advance of this debate. Atlanta Bishop Jack Lumenog from the Anglican Diocese of St. Ignatius Loyola reached out to me earlier this month, and here are just a few excerpts from the letter he sent to me. He said, "I am grateful to be one of your constituents in Georgia and to write to a fellow pastor whose voice carries both moral authority and legislative power in this defining moment for our nation. However, I write to you today with a heavy heart, deeply troubled by the state of our nation. As a faith leader, I am increasingly concerned for the most vulnerable among us, those who rely on Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. These vital programs appear to be next in line for cuts by DOGE that could threaten the well-being of millions. Scripture," he says, "reminds us that whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. It is our moral duty to advocate for the dignity and security of those who depend on these essential safety nets. We cannot allow them to be dismissed amid political and economic maneuvering by unelected bureaucrats like Elon Musk, who have placated the legislature and judiciary while wielding outsized influence over public policy, all while bypassing democratic accountability. Please be assured of my prayers for you and your leadership during this critical moment in our nation's history. May you find strength in your faith and courage in your convictions as you continue to fight for justice and righteousness." Thank you, Bishop Lumenog. You are not alone. In your witness earlier in the year, the three largest Catholic organizations in the country, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Catholic Health Association, and Catholic Charities USA, urged lawmakers to protect and strengthen Medicaid as a matter of faith. They wrote, "The Catholic Church teaches that human life is sacred and all people have inherent dignity and worth. As Catholic bishops and organizations that provide health care and social services on behalf of the church, we firmly believe that all people have the right to those necessities needed to live, found a family, and flourish. As you address reconciliation priorities, we urge you to prioritize those most in need and working families and protect the Medicaid program." We're hearing from a range of faith leaders because they understand that the acid test of someone's faith is a depth of their commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family. Nearly 2 million people in Georgia are enrolled in Medicaid. That's 1 in 5 Georgians. 1.3 million children in Georgia are enrolled in Medicaid. That's over 40% of every Georgia child, 2 in every 5 children. 250,000 Georgia seniors rely on Medicaid, including those living in nursing homes. That's around 1 in 7 Georgia seniors. And they are united in opposition to cuts to Medicaid. I hear their stories all the time. I want to just share a couple of them with you. Wisteria was excited to learn that she'd be expecting her first child, but her initial excitement quickly gave way to fear and anxiety as her pregnancy proved to be most difficult. During the pregnancy, doctors needed to perform an emergency operation, followed by an unexpected C-section delivery. And at the time of her pregnancy, Bristeria was working a part-time job that did not offer health benefits. Through family, friends, and coworkers, she discovered that she was eligible for Medicaid, which ultimately provided critical assistance in covering the cost for the care she needed through delivery. She was both relieved and grateful that a difficult pregnancy ended in the birth of a healthy baby boy. Now she's the proud mother of two. She works full-time as a deputy county clerk. She is now enrolled in an employer-provided health plan, but she remains forever grateful that Medicaid was there for her when she needed it. It provided a temporary safety net amid a challenging pregnancy. And now her life is much better because of it. Naomi enrolled in Medicaid after she lost her job when pregnant with her son Noah. Noah was born prematurely at just 26 weeks and lives with chronic and medically complex conditions that require round-the-clock care. Noah's Medicaid coverage is provided through a combination of innovative programs, including Georgia's Right from the Start initiative for comprehensive health services and the Katie Beckett waiver program for children with complex medical needs. All over our country, there are children like Noah. His mom says, if we didn't have Medicaid, we would be in dire straits. Elizabeth from Ella-J, Georgia says, our lives depend on prescription medications and accessibilities. Please help us. Losing Medicaid would hurt disabled people or even potentially kill us without access to our medication. When it comes to politics or access to health care, disabled people are often left out and no one thinks of the consequences of taking away the things that help us. We live in forced poverty already and Medicaid is essential. Please think of us and be a voice for those who can't speak out. Finally, when Cindy was 17 years old, Cindy from Atlanta, she was a star athlete and a great student, preparing to go to college and enroll in ROTC. Her parents, who are refugees from Vietnam, moved to the United States to give her a better life, and she wanted to make them proud. But when she started feeling exhausted all the time and noticed swelling in her lymph nodes, she knew something was wrong. And after several visits to various doctors and the hospital, she was diagnosed with stage 2 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Obviously, that was devastating news for her and for her family. But they were at least grateful that Medicaid would cover all the treatment Cindy needed to survive. And just after Thanksgiving, her senior year in high school, Cindy started chemotherapy. Each session lasted 3.5 hours, and she had to do them every other week for 6 months. She went to classes as much as she could, took the SAT, and continued her plans to go to college. She went to her senior prom, even though it was just 2 days after her chemotherapy. But now Cindy is 30 years old. She's cancer-free. She's fascinated by all things aerospace, and she formed a group at her school to advocate for a new major in the field. She says, when I was 17, I was diagnosed with stage 2 non-Hodgkin lymphoma. But because of Medicaid, I was able to catch my cancer early, and today I'm cancer-free. I'm following my dreams of becoming an aerospace engineer, and I'm living proof that Medicaid saves lives. That's really the heart of it. Medicaid saves lives. And so I wanted to share these stories tonight because these are the stories of ordinary people. These are the stories of the folks who will not be able to stand on this Senate floor, but they need a voice. These are their stories, but in a real sense, these are our stories because, as Dr. King said, we are tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We got to know this very well over the last few years during the COVID-19 pandemic. A deadly airborne disease meant that if my neighbor was sick, I was potentially imperiled. That didn't make my neighbor my enemy. That simply means that I had an investment in my neighbor's health. My neighbor's health care was good for my health. And so that's the spirit with which we ought to be addressing something as sacred as crafting the nation's budget. I need other people's children to be okay for my children to be okay. I need people with disabilities to be okay for my children to be okay. I need seniors in nursing homes to be okay for all of us to be okay. I need children with cerebral palsy to be okay for my children to be okay. We need to look into each other's eyes and into the eyes of other people's children and see our own. So over the next few days, this body will be voting on a budget. And I submit that the budget says a whole lot about the body. It's a moral EKG. And the question is, are we well or do we have a heart condition? I submit that for all of our challenges, we suffer not from a poverty of resources, but a poverty of moral imagination. We are bigger, better, and stronger when our reach is wider and when we dare to build a nation that embraces all of our children. God give us strength, grace, and moral courage to get it right. I yield the floor. Madam President.
The senator from Georgia.
Madam President, I rise tonight in a moral moment in our nation. As we debate this bill, so much is on the line. The health care of over 16 million Americans, 750,000 of them Georgians, is on the line. Food for hungry children. In a wealthy nation where 1 in 5 children are already food insecure. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. Their livelihood, their welfare is on the line. The well-being of seniors in nursing homes and the disabled who rely on Medicaid and those who care for them is on the line. The fate of rural hospitals in Georgia, in Alaska, in Louisiana, in little towns all over this nation that are right now barely hanging on is on the line, and the scraps that they are throwing them while cutting them will not save them. And my friends on the other side of the aisle know it. They know that these scraps that they're throwing at rural hospitals will not save them. And so in a very real sense, lives are on the line. We are in a moral moment because something else is on the line. I submit that the character of the country is on the line. In real sense, the question tonight is, who are we? Not who do we tell ourselves we are, but who are we really? What and who do we care about? What kind of nation are we? And what kind of people do we want to be? Who matters? And who doesn't? Who do we think is dispensable? In no place is the answer to that question clearer than in a nation's budget. I submit that a budget is not just a fiscal document. A budget is a moral document. Show me your budget and I'll show you who you think matters and who doesn't. And if this awful budget were an EKG, it would suggest that our nation has a heart problem and is in need of moral surgery. And so I'm clear tonight. I understand the nature of what we are engaged in. This is a political process. It is. But it is also a moral exercise. Not only for the nation, but for each of us individually. And especially for the mere 100 of us out of a nation of 300 million who get to vote, perhaps in a matter of hours. We have the rare privilege of standing up for people who have entrusted with us the covenant of centering their families. It's a real privilege for the people of your state to say that since we can't all go to Washington, we're going to trust you in rooms of power to be thinking about our children, to be thinking about our parents as they deal with the blessings and the burdens of growing old. And so the question for me tonight is, how will we show up in this moment? And that's why yesterday I gathered in the Russell Rotunda with a multi-faith coalition of clergy to pray that lawmakers might have the courage to stand up to their party, to stand up to the special interests, and protect seniors in nursing homes and pregnant mothers on Medicaid and children who risk going to school hungry every single day in this country. 1 in 5 children in the wealthiest nation on the planet already food insecure. And with these SNAP cuts, this body is about to make it worse. And so, surrounded by a clergy of many faith traditions, yesterday I prayed that we would have the courage. I prayed that we would have the grace to stand as voices for the voiceless. And as I stood there, I could not help but feel a sense of deja vu. This is not the first time I've been in our nation's capital speaking out against these policies that betray hardworking families. It was 8 years ago, almost to the day in 2017, when Washington Republicans were trying to pass a tax bill that favored wealthy Americans over working families, that I came to this building not as a senator, but as a pastor. I had no idea that 8 years later I would be serving in this body. I had no notion that I would even run for the Senate. I came as a citizen. And standing with a multi-faith coalition, we were praying for our nation's leaders. We were gathered in the rotunda of the Russell Building, and as we were singing and praying, the Capitol Police said, I'm sorry, pastors, you can't sing and pray in the rotunda. If you do not disperse, we will have to arrest you. And let me say that the Capitol Police did not mishandle us that day. They were first-rate professionals. But they said that if you don't disperse, we will have to arrest you. What they didn't understand is that I had already been arrested. My conscience had been arrested. My heart and my imagination, my moral imagination, had been arrested by this idea that we as a country are better than this. I come from a tradition where you don't just pray with your lips, you pray with your legs. You put your body in the struggle for other struggling bodies. And so here I am tonight, 8 years later, having transformed my agitation into legislation. I was arrested that day, but I have transformed my protests into public policy. 8 years ago, I was on the outside. Tonight, I'm on the inside, but it's the same fight. Some of us fight on the inside, some of us fight on the outside, some of us get to serve in the Senate or in the House, others are just watching at home tonight. But be really clear that we are in the same fight, whether we are on the streets or in the suites. Same fight. And in some ways, this is the same bill 8 years later, just worse. Like most horror movies, the sequel tends to be worse. We were here 8 years ago. Washington politicians were trying their best to gut the Affordable Care Act. Remember that? They were trying to gut the Obamacare out of political motives. Millions of Americans were spared. But tonight is the sequel to that horror movie. They are back to their old political tricks, trying to dismantle the ACA again with this legislation. It's the same fight, just worse this time. Instead of extending tax credits that would lower health insurance costs for the middle class, my friends on the other side are giving billionaires and the richest of the rich a tax cut. They are working real hard tonight to help billionaires because God knows they are having a hard time, apparently. And what that means is that 1.2 million Georgians and nearly 20 million Americans are going to see their health care premiums rise. That's what's at stake tonight. If they enact these deep cuts to Medicaid, as they are positioned not to extend these premiums, these tax credits, they are raising the cost of health care for all of us. Even if you are on private insurance, you are not safe. Your health care is about to go up. Your hospital might close because they're cutting these clean energy tax cuts. Your utility bills are about to go up. And so I have a question tonight. Who voted for that? Some of us are Democrats, some of us are Republicans, some of us are independents, some voted for one party, some voted for the other party. I get it, but who voted for that? Who voted for everybody's health care premiums to go up and their hospitals to close? Here's what I know. The folks back in Georgia didn't vote for that. They voted for me and they voted for Donald Trump, but they didn't vote for that. Ordinary folks don't want this. Just ordinary, everyday people who barely pay attention to politics, they don't want this. Even a Fox News poll, and you won't often hear me say that, but even a Fox News poll from this month found that Americans don't support this big, ugly bill. This is symptomatic of the ways in which the people's voices have been squeezed out of their democracy. This is not just a health care fight, it is that. It is not just a fight for food security, for SNAP, it is that. But in a real sense, it is a fight for our democracy, whose voice gets to be heard in this chamber. That's what this is about, the character of the country. Ordinary Americans don't want to do this to our children. That's why they need to know that 71% of all Medicaid enrollees in Georgia are children. 71%. Taking away health care from kids to pay for tax cuts for billionaires. Now, let me be clear. I'm all for tax cuts. I believe working families deserve a tax cut, and I certainly don't want to see them face a tax hike this year. That's why I want to nearly double the child tax credit. I believe in tax cuts for hardworking families, for middle-class people, for working-class families. But instead of doing that, instead of helping working-class families who are struggling now against a 10% tax on everything and rising costs, we're now burdening our children by adding $3 trillion to the debt. We're taking away health care from kids and then burdening them with the debt. We are engaged in Robin Hood in reverse, this body of stealing from the poor in order to give to the rich. This massive transfer of wealth from the bottom to the top. Yeah, this is socialism for the rich. And when the people hear about it, guess what? They don't like it. Democrats and Republicans and independents, when the people hear about what's in this big, ugly bill, they don't like it. And that's why the folks on the other side are trying their best to fast track it. That's why they're trying to pass it, and they haven't even finished writing it. They're twisting themselves in knots, making their members walk the plank under the threat of a primary to pass this big, ugly bill. The American people do not want to rob our children of food and health care and then burden them with trillions in debt to give billionaires and wealthy corporations another tax cut. The people do not want this bill. And so if the people do not want this bill, but they are trying to pass it, here's the question you got to ask yourselves at home. You have to ask yourselves, well, who are they working for? Who are they fighting for? Who do they think matters? Do you think they are working for you? This is a moral moment, and a budget is a moral document. And we have been summoned to this moment, people of faith and people of moral courage who claim no particular faith at all. And maybe because I was here yesterday and 8 years ago for a similar fight with faith leaders, maybe because I'm a preacher and it's Sunday, and I've been here instead of church, I have especially been thinking about those of us who are people of faith. People whose lives are informed by Scripture, people of the book. And maybe those of us who have different politics but read from the same book ought to spend some time together reading the book. Because I do sometimes wonder, and I say this with all humility, none of us owns the truth. But if I'm honest, there are days when I have to ask people of my faith tradition as a Christian, are we reading the same book? The book I know says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was sick, I was in prison and you visited me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it also unto me. The book that I love says, learn to do good, seek justice, rescue the oppressed, defend the orphan, plead for the widow. Speak out for those who cannot speak, for the rights of the destitute. Speak out, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. My book says, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord and will be repaid in full. The prophet Amos condemns those who buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They sell the poor out and working class people for cheap. And for those of us who have a vote in this moment, for my colleagues who are swinging on a moral dilemma, I hear the prophet Micah say, he has already told you what is good. And what does the Lord require? But that you do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. May God be with our nation and grant us grace, wisdom, and courage for this moment. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Mr. President, I rise today in the wake of the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe unfolding.
Sir, the Senate's in a quorum call.
I ask that it be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today in the wake of the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our eyes in Gaza. As we say in my church's preaching tradition, let me make it plain. It is wrong to starve children to death. It is wrong to starve people to death. Yet in this moment, we are witnessing a famine unfold among children and innocent men and women in Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison, a pit of human misery. Reports estimate 18,500 Palestinian children have been killed in the conflict. Over 20,000 children were treated for acute malnutrition between April and mid-July of this year. And at least 3,000 children were severely malnourished. In Gaza today, starvation is being weaponized. Famine isn't a forecast, but a fact, despite the denials of the Netanyahu government. And so I rise today not only as a senator, but as a pastor of the church where Martin Luther King Jr. served, who told us that we are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I rise today as a father to say there is devastating starvation going on right now. And all of us, the state of Israel, the United States, and the world, cannot turn our eyes away. We must get to these people the food, the medicine, the dignity that their humanity requires. The images of mass starvation are sickening. Children with no family, bare feet, empty bellies, hollow eyes, who are seeking aid only to be trampled to death by other desperate people. And in their most desperate moments, some have been met not with mercy or medicine, but with malice. Young people seeking bread have been met with bullets. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu must stop using indiscriminate bombing and forced starvation, and instead focus on a lasting moral peace that secures the return of the remaining hostages while respecting the dignity of Palestinian families and children who want the same peace as our Israeli brothers and sisters. All of us are children of the living God. And in the eyes of suffering children, we see a glimpse of God's face. After international outcry and public shaming, it was a welcomed announcement that Prime Minister Netanyahu would allow more aid into Gaza and enact military pauses to allow food to reach people, but what has been delivered so far is just a drop in the bucket of what this moment requires. The people of Gaza deserve the same access to food and medicine that we would want, any one of us would want for our own children. Now, there's no question that peace in the Middle East is a tough issue. If it were easy, it would have been resolved by now. And we cannot forget about what happened on October 7th. And we must continue to call on Hamas to free the hostages. These folks deserve to go home. They deserve to be home with their families. So we call on Hamas to release the hostages. And as I've said time and time again, including in the wake of October 7th, Israel has a right to defend itself. But what is happening now? Children are being wounded. Many of them have been orphaned. Pregnant and nursing mothers are having to navigate a war zone while nourishing their children. And beyond the obvious moral atrocity, the question is, how has this continuing bombing and mass starvation made our friend Israel safer? How has this made Israel safer? And at what cost? I urge President Trump, who has said that there is, quote, real starvation in Gaza, to leverage American leadership to bring an end to this human suffering. Human lives are at stake, and America's moral credibility is on the line. Inflicting human misery for its own sake is not a strategy. Starving the people of Gaza has not released any hostages or gotten us any closer to a ceasefire. The current trajectory is unsustainable. I do not believe that the answer to death and destruction is more death and destruction. There's this phrase in Gaza, it's an acronym, WCNSF. Wounded child, no surviving family. I can't think of a worse way to begin your life than to be a child or a baby wounded with no family. This phrase takes on new meaning as we are hearing stories out of Gaza of parents starving to death to give what little food they have to keep their children alive. So here's what I believe. I believe in the humanity of all of God's children. And that's why I pressed the previous administration and the Netanyahu administration to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza. I voted to give $10 billion in humanitarian aid to Gaza and other humanitarian crises. And just this month, I joined more than 40 of my colleagues calling for the large-scale expansion of humanitarian aid, and I urged the Trump administration to resume diplomatic efforts to end this war. I also called on the administration to end the United States' support and financing for the shady private organization that has been connected to deadly violence against starving people seeking food in Gaza. We must instead resume support for the existing UN-led aid efforts with enhanced oversight to ensure that help reaches those in need. My North Star in this whole conflict is a world that embraces children on both sides of this conflict. Because here's the thing that even mortal enemies have in common. All of us want our children to be okay. We all want our children to be safe. And as I said this on the floor of the Senate, when I called for the ceasefire at a time when folks felt like you couldn't even say the word, this pressure has prompted temporary pauses in violence and some aid, but it is clear that these piecemeal steps are failing. America is Israel's friend. However, being a friend to Israel does not mean being complicit in its government's immoral actions unfolding even as I speak. Israel's strength is rooted in its allies. But allyship, true allyship, involves accountability. Here's how I know when I've got a good friend. Good friends tell you the truth. We must tell Netanyahu he must change course. The Israeli government's current path is hurting the country's global standing and support in the world. So in the end, this growing humanitarian crisis is not good for Israel. Good friends tell you the truth. And that is why yesterday I voted in favor of the joint resolutions of disapproval. I've been thinking of the words of my mentor, my hero, who happened also to be my parishioner, the late, great John Lewis. John Lewis said that when you see something is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. And so I'm speaking up. I'm speaking with my lips and my legs because the acid test of your faith is your commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family. We must work towards saving lives and centering our common humanity, returning the hostages home to their families, and securing peace and safety for all those in the region. Last year, I had the honor of meeting with the late Pontiff, Pope Francis, at the Vatican. And I was struck by something the Pope said to me. He said to me that there was a small parish in Gaza that he called practically every night just to check on them, just to pray for them. Leader of Catholics all over the world, he called that little parish to pray with them. Well, the other day, that church was bombed. As it turns out, there was no sanctuary for them, even in the sanctuary. And so tonight, I'm going to say a special prayer, not only for the people of that parish, but for the people all around them. I'm going to pray for peace. But we don't just pray with our lips, we have to pray with our legs. We have to work for the world that we dream of for our children. History may not remember the debates that we had in these chambers, but it will remember whether we acted when children were starving and hostages were languishing. Silence is complicity. Inaction in the face of famine is a choice. So let us choose life, dignity, and a peace worthy of the ideals we claim to pursue. I yield the floor.